The mishnah in the 8th chapter of Masechet Shevi'it starts out with a klal gadol, a general rule, which presents a hierarchy of uses for food and produce that grows during the shemitah year. At the very top of the hierarchy is food that's grown for human consumption. Below that, food that's grown for human medicinal purposes. Below that, food used for animals. And below that, food that's used to treat animals medicinally. Non-food uses for people are given a hierarchy as well. Anointing oneself with food products is a lower use than eating them. Sales is lower than anointing. The mishnah also talks about paying your laborers wages with food and processing food in large scale, which is a lower use than processing food for individual use. At the very bottom of the ranking is using food for things which are very far removed from eating and considered almost degrading for produce which might have been used for food in some way. The examples given are oiling hides and heating bathhouses with shemitah produce. The mishnah also discusses different types of crops, mostly dealing with vegetables and fruits, which grow during the shemitah year on their own, and the different uses these crops have. We learn in this Perek what you do if you break the rules. What happens if you use shemitah produce inappropriately? And the answer is almost always creative ways of redirecting this food towards food uses. The mishnah takes an interesting tour, in addition, of the service professions. Different services one might employ in the time of the mishnah in the day-to-day. A well digger, an attendant at a public bath, a barber, a sailor. And the main question animating this Perek seems to be, how do we actually function as a society during shemitah? We spend 6 years focused so much on food production. God is insistent that we take care of the poor and the vulnerable. And agriculture, industry, and differentiation of labor is meant to do this, to help us take care of each other and keep a society running. In the shemitah year, we have to find a way to do this without working the land and while also being careful about the sanctity of produce and anything exchanged for produce. In the Torah, shemitah is this vision of ultimate rest, but our Perek of Mishnah acknowledges service workers still need to go to work and we still need to pay them. A barber still cuts hair, the bathhouse attendant still helps maintain and run bath facilities, and the water bearer still needs to help us get our water. The 6th mishnah in our chapter touches on some of these themes, balancing the need to uphold shemitah laws and values and yet still live. The mishnah teaches, figs grown in the sabbatical year may not be cut in the muktzeh, but one may cut them in an open place. Grapes may not be trodden in the winepress, but they may be trodden in the kneading trough. Olives may not be prepared in an olive press or a small olive press, but one may crush them and bring them to a small olive press outside in the field. Rabbi Shimon says they may even be crushed in a larger olive press, and then one brings them into a smaller olive press. Rav Shagar comments on this mishnah, and he writes, regarding the prohibitions of harvesting and cutting produce, the picture is complicated. The Sifra, the Midrash Halacha, defines the prohibition this way. Quote, you may not harvest that which is being protected, but you can harvest that which is made ownerless. The first teaching in the Mishnah connects to the prohibition of cutting produce in the larger context of society. And the second teaching in the Mishnah seems to be connected to the prohibition of working the land, allowing the land to rest. And the context there is our relationship to the land as opposed to our relationship to each other. The Rishonim disagree about how to understand this prohibition of harvesting during shemitah. According to Rashi and Ramban, the reason for the prohibition is that it shows ownership over the land. Harvesting as an owner would is prohibited during the shemitah year because the land should be seen as ownerless. The Gra connects the prohibition to harvest to the overall resistance to malacha, to resting. So we refrain from productive labors on the land during shemitah, and therefore, according to the Gra, The prohibition of harvesting is only when one harvests with farm tools on a larger scale, but harvesting with one's hand would be permissible. The Rambam seems to combine the two approaches. He writes, "One should not gather the fruit produced by trees in the 7th year in the way that one gathers them every year, as it's stated in Vayikra, and the grapes of your untended vines you shall not reap." And writes the Rambam, "And if one reaps in order to work the tree, or one reaps in the way that's usual of reapers, one gets lashes." Harvesting is characterized here as a double prohibition, writes Rav Shagar. It's comprised of working the land and the need to harvest in a manner distinct from the usual way of harvesting, the purpose of which is to show that the land is ownerless. The Rambam combines here two different prohibitions which have different purposes. One prohibition, harvesting in order to work the tree, is so that we don't show ownership over the tree, so we don't help the tree grow. And that's about social equality, of not showing ownership over the land. The prohibition of harvesting in the usual manner, using technology, is about the conflict between civilization and sanctity. And therefore we're allowed to use our hands, but not technology. It would seem that the Rambam's approach connects the two prohibitions. Equality, writes Rav Shagar, is an expression of sanctity, just as resting from creative labors during the Shemitah year is an expression of sanctity. Sanctity is profaned when one does prohibited labors during the Shemitah year, but also sanctity is profaned through commercial exploitation, which might create social inequality.